In the dark underbelly of 1980s New York City, where crack cocaine ravaged communities and destroyed countless lives, one man's name became synonymous with violence, betrayal, and the destructive power of the drug trade. Alberto Martinez, known to the streets as Alpo Martinez, carved a path of destruction through Harlem and Washington, D.C. that would leave dozens dead, families shattered, and communities terrorized. His story is not one of glorification, but a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of choosing a life of crime over humanity. Before we dive deeper into this cautionary tale, I want to connect with you. Where are you watching this from? Are you tuning in from New York, where these events unfolded, or perhaps from another corner of the world, learning about this dark chapter in American history? If you're finding value in this deep dive into one of the most notorious figures in drug trafficking history, please hit that like button. It helps us continue bringing you these important stories that examine the real cost of crime on our communities. Born on June 8, 1966, in East Harlem, New York, to Puerto Rican parents, Alpo Martinez entered a world already struggling with poverty and limited opportunities. But rather than seeking legitimate paths forward, Martinez chose violence and exploitation. At just 14 years old, he began selling drugs, starting what would become a criminal empire built on the suffering of addicts and the destruction of his own community. This wasn't a child forced into crime by circumstance alone. This was a conscious choice to prey on the vulnerable, a choice that would define his legacy of pain. By 1985, Martinez had connected with Azi Faison, a drug dealer from West Harlem, and rapidly ascended through the ranks of the cocaine and crack trade. The speed of his rise was matched only by the ruthlessness of his methods. By the time he reached 20 years old, Martinez had become a millionaire, not through innovation or hard work in legitimate enterprise, but through flooding his own neighborhood with poison. While families struggled and children grew up surrounded by addiction and violence, Martinez flaunted his wealth with luxury cars and expensive jewelry, displaying a callous disregard for the misery his actions caused. His lifestyle was extravagant and deliberately ostentatious. He wanted people to see his success, to know his name, to fear his reputation. But behind every dollar he earned was a life destroyed, a family torn apart, an addict spiraling deeper into dependency. The crack epidemic of the 1980s didn't happen in a vacuum. It was fueled by individuals like Martinez, who prioritized personal profit over human life, who saw their neighbors not as fellow human beings, but as customers and obstacles. The violence that surrounded Martinez wasn't incidental to his operation. It was integral to it. He didn't just sell drugs. He murdered those who stood in his way or whom he perceived as threats. In 1990, he was implicated in the murder of his former partner, Rich Porter, a killing that shocked even the hardened streets of Harlem. This wasn't a crime of passion or self-defense. This was cold, calculated murder of someone who had once trusted him. It was the ultimate betrayal, a pattern that would repeat itself throughout Martinez's criminal career. Not satisfied with dominating Harlem alone, Martinez expanded his operations to Washington, D.C. in 1990, bringing his brand of violence and exploitation to a new city. In the nation's capital, he hired Wayne Perry, known by the street name Silk, as his bodyguard and enforcer. Perry would become notorious in his own right for extreme violence, but he was simply an extension of Martinez's ruthless approach to business. Together, they terrorized the Washington, D.C. drug trade, eliminating competitors and anyone who posed a threat to their empire. The body count continued to rise. Martinez was implicated in numerous murders, including that of Washington, D.C. drug dealer Michael Anthony Salters, known as Frey, and Brooklyn drug dealer Demencio Benson, among many others. Each murder represented not just a life taken, but families left without fathers, sons, and brothers. These weren't abstract casualties of a drug war. They were human beings whose lives were cut short by Martinez's ambition and greed. The territorial disputes and betrayals that motivated these killings weren't justifications. They were simply the predictable outcomes of a lifestyle built on violence. What made Martinez particularly dangerous was his complete lack of loyalty. In the criminal underworld, there's often talk of codes and honor among thieves. But Martinez demonstrated repeatedly that he recognized no such code. He would work with partners, gain their trust, learn their vulnerabilities, and then eliminate them without hesitation if it served his interests. This pattern of betrayal would ultimately define his life and, ironically, lead to his downfall. By 1991, law enforcement had built a substantial case against Martinez. The violence had become too extensive, too public, too brazen to ignore. Federal authorities had been tracking his operations, gathering evidence, and building connections between Martinez and the growing list of bodies attributed to his organization. The walls were closing in, but Martinez continued his operations, seemingly believing himself untouchable. On November 6, 1991, that illusion of invincibility shattered. Martinez was arrested in Washington, D.C., facing charges that would ensure he never saw freedom again if convicted. The indictment was staggering in its scope. Conspiracy to commit murder, 14 counts of murder, and numerous drug-related offenses. At just 25 years old, Martinez faced either the death penalty or life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The empire he had built through blood and cocaine was crumbling, and he faced the very real possibility of paying the ultimate price for his crimes. But even in custody, facing the consequences of his actions, Martinez would make one more choice that would define his legacy and seal his reputation as the ultimate betrayer. Rather than accepting responsibility for his crimes and facing the punishment he had earned through years of violence and drug trafficking, Martinez chose to cooperate with federal authorities. He became an informant, agreeing to testify against his former associates in exchange for a reduced sentence. This decision to cooperate wasn't motivated by remorse or a desire to help his community recover from the damage he had caused. It was pure self-preservation, a final act of betrayal against the very people who had trusted him and worked alongside him. Martinez provided testimony that would send numerous associates to prison, most notably Wayne Perry, his former bodyguard and enforcer, who received 5 consecutive life sentences based partly on Martinez's testimony. The information Martinez provided to authorities was extensive and damning. He detailed the inner workings of drug trafficking operations across multiple cities, described murders and conspiracies, and implicated dozens of individuals. While law enforcement celebrated their cooperation with Martinez as a victory in the war on drugs, the reality was more complex. Yes, dangerous criminals were taken off the streets, but the man responsible for orchestrating much of the violence and drug trafficking received leniency for his willingness to betray others. In exchange for his cooperation, Martinez received a sentence of 35 years in federal prison, a significant reduction from the death penalty or life imprisonment he had faced. He was sent to ADX Florence, a supermax facility in Colorado, known as one of the most secure prisons in America, where the nation's most dangerous criminals are housed in extreme isolation. Even in prison, Martinez required special protection due to the targets placed on him by his testimony. The decision to cooperate with authorities made Martinez a marked man in the criminal underworld. The label of snitch or rat carries severe consequences in that world, where loyalty is supposedly valued above all else. Of course, Martinez had demonstrated throughout his career that he himself valued nothing above his own interests, so his decision to inform was entirely consistent with his character, but that consistency didn't protect him from the hatred and desire for revenge that his testimony generated. Martinez served his time largely in isolation, cut off from the general prison population for his own safety. The years in ADX Florence were spent in a small cell for 23 hours a day, with minimal human contact and extremely restricted privileges. It was a far cry from the luxury lifestyle he had flaunted during his drug-dealing days. But it was also far less than the justice demanded by his numerous victims and their families. Then in 2015, after serving approximately 24 years of his 35-year sentence, Martinez was released from federal custody. The early release was granted based on his cooperation with authorities and time served. He entered the Federal Witness Protection Program, a system designed to keep informants safe from retaliation by providing them with new identities and relocating them to areas where they're unknown. Martinez was given the new name Abraham G. Rodriguez and relocated to Lewiston, Maine, far from the streets of New York and Washington, D.C., where he had committed his crimes. The decision to release Martinez early and protect him through the Witness Protection Program was controversial. While the program serves an important purpose in encouraging cooperation with law enforcement, it also meant that a man responsible for numerous murders and untold destruction in multiple communities was given a chance to restart his life, while his victims remained dead and their families continued to grieve. The families of Rich Porter, Michael Anthony Salters, Demencio Benson, and the many others Martinez had killed received no such opportunity for a fresh start. For several years, Martinez lived quietly in Lewiston, maintaining a low profile as Abraham Rodriguez. Maine was about as far from the Harlem streets culturally and geographically as Martinez could get while remaining in the continental United States. The small city offered anonymity and distance from those who might seek revenge. For a time, it appeared that Martinez might successfully disappear into his new identity and live out his days in obscurity. Welcome back to the second part of our examination of Alpo Martinez's life and crimes. If you're just joining us, I encourage you to watch part 1 first. Where in the world are you watching this from? Please take a moment to hit that like button if you're finding this informative. Despite the protection and new identity provided to him, Martinez made a fatal decision. He returned to Harlem, the very neighborhood where he had committed his crimes and where families of his victims still lived. This wasn't a secret return. Martinez lived openly in Harlem, driving expensive vehicles and maintaining a flashy lifestyle. He acted as though he were untouchable, displaying the same arrogance that had characterized his criminal career. In the early morning hours of October 31st, 2021, at approximately 3:30 a.m., Martinez was shot 5 times in a drive-by shooting while sitting in his 2017 Dodge Ram pickup truck in Harlem. He was 55 years old and died on the same streets where he had once ruled through violence. Initially, many assumed his cooperation with authorities had resulted in revenge. However, investigators concluded the murder stemmed from a road rage incident. Martinez had been riding a motorcycle through Harlem erratically, angering another driver and leading to a confrontation that escalated to murder. Even after everything, Martinez was still making reckless choices that endangered himself and others. In February 2022, Shaquem Parker, a 27-year-old man, was arrested and charged with the murder. However, on July 13, 2024, Parker was acquitted of all charges. No one has been held legally accountable for Martinez's death. The case remains officially unsolved, with no active investigation as of 2026. Martinez's death carried profound irony. A man who murdered numerous people, betrayed everyone who trusted him, and destroyed countless lives through drugs and violence, ultimately escaped full justice through cooperation with authorities. He received early release, was given protection at taxpayer expense, then threw it away by returning to the streets and engaging in reckless behavior. His death came not through elaborate revenge, but through random violence following his own poor choices. Martinez's cultural legacy was already cemented before his death. In 2002, the film Paid in Full dramatized the stories of Martinez, Azy Faison, and Rich Porter during the crack epidemic. Rapper Cameron portrayed Rico, a character based on Martinez. The film depicted the lifestyle and violence of the drug trade, though it unfortunately glamorized aspects of criminal behavior for some viewers. Martinez has been referenced in countless hip-hop songs by major artists, including 50 Cent, Big L, Drake, Jay-Z, Nas, Pusha T, and Meek Mill. He became a reference point in hip-hop culture, sometimes mentioned admiringly for his wealth and power, other times derisively for his betrayals. This cultural immortalization is troubling because it risks overshadowing the real human cost of his actions and the communities he devastated. In 2025, there were mentions of a potential series titled Pain in Full the Series, reportedly produced by 50 Cent, scheduled for 2026. However, as of January 2026, no official confirmation has been released. The damage Martinez caused extends far beyond those he personally killed or the drugs he personally sold. Every addict he supplied helped create demand that drew more dealers into the trade. Every murder contributed to a culture of violence that traumatized entire neighborhoods. Every betrayal reinforced the twisted codes that perpetuate cycles of revenge and violence. Consider the families of his victims, the mother who lost her son, Rich Porter, the families of Michael Anthony Salters and Demencio Benson, and many others whose names aren't widely known, but whose losses are equally devastating. These families never received meaningful justice. Martinez served less than 25 years for crimes, including at least 14 murders. He was released early, given protection, and allowed to live freely while their loved ones remained dead. Consider the communities of Harlem and Washington, D.C. that bore the brunt of his drug empire. The crack epidemic didn't just affect drug users, it destabilized entire neighborhoods, increased violent crime, overwhelmed social services, broke up families, and left scars that persist today. While Martinez accumulated wealth, children in these neighborhoods stepped over addicts on their way to school, heard gunshots at night, and lost parents and siblings to drugs and violence. The fact that Martinez shortened his sentence through cooperation raises important questions about how the justice system handles informants. While criminal testimony can be valuable for prosecutions, we must ask whether the price is too high when someone responsible for 14 murders serves only 24 years. The families of Martinez's victims might argue that justice was not served. Some might attempt to frame Martinez's story as shaped by poverty, racism, or lack of opportunity. While systemic inequalities contribute to crime rates in disadvantaged communities, this framing removes individual agency and responsibility. Martinez wasn't forced to sell drugs at 14. Many young people in similar circumstances make different choices. He wasn't forced to murder or become an informant. These were choices prioritizing self-interest over accountability. We can recognize that poverty and discrimination make crime more likely while still holding individuals accountable for choosing violence and exploitation. Martinez had opportunities throughout his life to make different choices, to step away from crime, to consider the impact of his actions. At every turning point, he chose the path that benefited him regardless of who it hurt. Martinez's story should serve as a cautionary tale about the true cost of criminal lifestyle. The glamour in movies and music is a lie. The reality is violence, betrayal, paranoia, imprisonment, and often death. Martinez lived as a millionaire for a few years, then spent over 2 decades in harsh prison, then lived as a hunted man, and finally died violently in the street. For young people who might see Martinez as a role model, consider what his life actually amounted to. By 25, his freedom was over. By 30, he was hated and hunted. By 55, he was dead in the street. He never had a legitimate career, never built anything positive, never contributed to his community meaningfully. He took and destroyed, and ultimately lost everything, including his life. For communities still struggling with drug violence, Martinez's story reminds us why these lifestyles must be rejected completely. The drug trade doesn't bring prosperity. It brings death, addiction, and chaos. Dealers don't care about their communities. They destroy their own neighbors for profit. Martinez died as he lived, through violence, recklessness, and poor choices. His death brought closure and justice to no one. The man accused of killing him was acquitted, victims' families have no peace, and communities continue dealing with the crack epidemic's legacy. In the end, Alberto Martinez was a murderer, drug dealer, betrayer, and destroyer of communities. He made his choices freely and repeatedly chose violence and exploitation. He faced some consequences, but escaped full justice. He lived his final years as a marked man, unable to escape his past, and died violently much as he had lived. There are no heroes in this story, only victims, perpetrators, and communities still healing. May we learn from this dark chapter and choose better for ourselves, our families, and our communities going forward.